scientists, and you don't have to be actually keeping abreast of the rest of science. I don't at all agree with that idea. I don't think Marxism is a science. I think the opposite. I think that science itself is the most revolutionary form of knowledge there is. Science doesn't need improving. You don't need to tinker with it. You're just going to be consistent and carry on being scientific even when it's difficult. And Marx and Engels were scientists who did that. The bourgeoisie can't do that. They can be sort of scientific in bits and bobs about the external world, but as soon as it gets to society, of course they can't be scientific. In order to be scientific about society, you've got to, in a sense, stand outside this society. And that's why it's so essential to be part of the organised working class, actively fighting against this society. You cannot be scientific about capitalism if you're part of the problem. Why is this topic about human origins and primitive communism, why are we even talking about it? Maybe it's not the main thing. I actually think the main thing is what I've just said. The main thing is that we are scientists. And the main thing is to put the big picture together. It's to integrate the natural sciences with the arts and the humanities and to be, if you like, conscious. We need to put the current crisis of capitalism, we need to put recent history in its proper context. And the overall context, of course, is the history of the universe, from the Big Bang onwards, the origin of life on this planet, the origin of human life, the evolution of life since human life emerged, the origin of class society. We need to put the whole thing together. And if we can't do that, we simply won't be equipped for the task which faces us as communists. So it's not a minor thing, it's the main thing, it's putting the big picture together. I'm not going to say that the particular bit I focus on is necessarily the main thing, but if we don't focus on what it means to be human and how we got to be human and all that stuff, then there's a huge gap. And in fact what's going to happen is that the natural sciences and the social and human sciences won't be connected, because we won't know how nature turned into humanity and culture, because that middle bit won't be there. And if you read Marx's early writings, actually they're all on that subject. Nearly all Marx's early writings are on that very subject. In a way they're anthropology. They're about what it means to be human, what consciousness is, what labour is. And although Marx ended up exploring capitalism in great detail with his Das Kapital, of course, as everybody knows, he didn't really mean, he didn't mean to make that the main emphasis. He wanted, as I just said, the big picture to be the main emphasis, and to the extent that it was possible for Engels to kind of finish some of the things which Marx left unfinished, Engels, of course, did his best. We should perhaps remember that in the last decade of Marx's life, poor man, he started learning Russian. Why did he start learning Russian? It's because at that time, in that period, the later part of the 19th century, some of the most exciting ethnography was done by Russian ethnographers. And Marx needed to keep abreast of it, and he thought he needed to learn Russian in order to understand the Russian Mir, this peasant commune, and in a sense, primitive communism. So, science. Science, I'll just quote Trotsky, because he put it pretty well really. Science is knowledge that endows us with power. The key thing there, of course, is us. To be science, it really has to be us in a pretty universalistic sense. The way I distinguish science from ideology is quite simple. If the knowledge gives certain people power but not others, it's ideology. So all kinds of different sorts of sexist and racist and crap bourgeois ideology might give certain people power. The reason it's not science is because it gives them power at the expense of the rest of us. If it's science, it's empowering, full stop. No matter who you are, you can be male, female, rich, poor, whatever it is, it's empowering to know, for example, that if you electrolyse water, it will give you 2 volumes of hydrogen to 1 of oxygen. Science's knowledge that gives us power. Us, meaning if you're human, you should get power from that form of knowledge. But in order to put the big picture together, we have to be not just scientists in that bourgeois sense of controlling bits and bobs of nature for particular purposes. We need to put the big picture together, and that means being dialecticians. It means being able to resolve contradictions, transcending contradictions, instead of being gripped by those contradictions. I'm not going to go into any detail now, but when it comes to looking at human origins, if you think that we humans are animals, and that's it, if you have a kind of standard Darwinian naked ape view that humans evolved and various things happened and got a bit more clever than other apes and brains got a bit bigger, but essentially we're animals, there's kind of a lot going for that idea. It solves a lot of problems because you can just use ordinary Darwinism. But in making the problem of human origins simple, you're hitting up against a brick wall, basically. And I just want to just very briefly say that although Darwinism works to explain a huge amount of stuff, people are often unaware of this. There is actually no Darwinian explanation for the main, what many people think is the main thing about humans. The main thing about humans is, obviously you can say neighbour and stuff, but what marks out human as different from an ape? It's a particular form of consciousness we have as expressed in language. And Darwinism does not have an explanation for the origins of language. People don't know that. People sometimes think, oh, language must have evolved. I mean, surely it's easy, isn't it? I mean, all animals have some form of communication system. Apes communicate, they gesture, they call. Whales have songs. Humans are quite clever. All animals cooperate. Humans cooperate a bit more. Language will have evolved. If you read a book like, I don't know, I recently had a look again at a book I had been tempted to buy, not tempted, prompted, coerced, almost coerced to buy. Chris Harman's People's History of the World, and it starts out with this story just about how language evolved because humans became more cooperative. And actually, no Darwinian thinks that's sufficient as an explanation, because if that was the case, then the more cooperative a species, the more language it would have. And the thing about language is that it's not like that. It's there or it's not there. It's not like chimps have got communication systems more language-like than macaques or vervet monkeys. In fact, in the animal, if you look at the natural world, the species that's got the closest to language is actually bees, in the sense that they have a thing called displaced reference. And they've got very small brains, and the idea that sort of large brains and more coordination somehow produces language just doesn't work. So there's no theory to explain the origin of language, and if you can't explain the origin of language, then a whole lot of other stuff about humans you haven't got a theory of either. So, to put the big picture together, you have to understand how instead of evolution always being a question of incremental cumulative change, at certain moments in the evolution of life on Earth, something very different happens. You get a build-up of contradictions, a build-up of conflicts, and then at a certain point, quantitative changes reach a kind of tipping point, and then an explosion or a catastrophe, and a qualitative change emerges as all the contradictions are resolved. And there's a wonderful book called The Major Transitions in Evolution, written by, in a way, people in the Darwinian community sometimes call him God. He died a few years ago, John Maynard Smith, pointing out that the evolution of life on Earth, and he's almost a fundamentalist Darwinian, goes through major transitions which are quite sudden, quite extraordinary moments, like, for example, the origin of DNA, the origin of life itself, the origin of multicellular organisms. And he treats the origin of human society and language as one of those major transitions. So my position, which is that we became human and language emerged in the course of a revolution, is a version of that major transitions